Flames licked the night sky as Willow Taylor watched her newly inherited mercantile store burn to the ground, her dreams disappearing with each crackling timber. The year was 1876, and in Red Bluff, California, a woman with no husband and no family was already viewed with suspicion. Now she would be seen as something far worse. She did it herself. Insurance money. Someone shouted from the crowd that had gathered in the dusty Main Street. "My father built that store," Willow cried, her voice raw from the smoke. She had arrived in town just 3 weeks prior, after receiving word that her estranged father had passed, leaving her his business, the only inheritance from a man who had abandoned her and her mother 15 years earlier. At 25, Willow had traveled alone from Boston with hopes of a fresh start, only to find herself in the midst of disaster. Sheriff Holden pushed through the gathering, his weathered face grim in the firelight. "Miss Taylor, I'm afraid I'll need to ask you some questions." Willow's emerald eyes widened. "You can't possibly think I had anything to do with this. You were the last one seen inside, and folks are saying you've been complaining about debt. Insurance money would solve that right quick." The sheriff's hand rested casually on his holster. "Where were you when the fire started?" "I was at Mrs. Peterson's boarding house. I've been staying there since I arrived." Willow's voice shook as the implications of his questions sank in. "We'll see about that." Sheriff Holden's eyes narrowed. "Don't be leaving town, Miss Taylor." The crowd's murmurs grew louder, and Willow felt their stares burning into her back as she slowly retreated from the scene. She had never felt more alone. 2 days later, Willow sat in Sheriff Holden's office, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, as he reviewed the fire marshal's preliminary findings. "Marshal says it was definitely arson," the sheriff announced, leaning back in his creaking chair. "Coal oil used as an accelerant started in the back storeroom." "I had nothing to do with this," Willow insisted, her voice stronger than she felt. "Why would I destroy the only thing of value I have, insurance money?" the sheriff repeated flatly. "You'd been complaining to folks about how your father left you with more debt than profit, said you might have to sell." "I was merely being honest about the challenges. That doesn't mean I would burn down my own livelihood." The sheriff rose, his expression unmoved. "Miss Taylor, I'm placing you under house arrest until the investigation is complete. You're to remain at Mrs. Peterson's boarding house. If you attempt to leave town, I'll have no choice but to put you in a cell." Willow's throat tightened as she fought back tears. "This is absurd. I'm innocent." "That's for a judge to decide." Sheriff Holden opened his office door. "You best pray we find evidence that says otherwise." As Willow stepped onto the wooden sidewalk, she felt the weight of suspicious stares. Women gathered their children closer as she passed. Men who had tipped their hats to her just days before now glared openly. Red Bluff had already decided her guilt. That evening, as Willow picked at her dinner in the boarding house's common room, the front door swung open, bringing with it a blast of hot summer air and the imposing figure of a stranger. He stood over 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered in a dust-covered duster, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. When he removed it, revealing dark hair and piercing blue eyes, the room fell silent. Mrs. Peterson hurried forward. "Can I help you, sir?" "Name's Zane Quincy," he said, his voice deep and rough-edged. "Looking for a room for a few days." "Of course, Mr. Quincy, we have one available," Mrs. Peterson replied, shooting a nervous glance toward Willow. Zane followed her gaze, his eyes lingering on Willow's face for a moment longer than was comfortable before he turned back to the landlady. "Much obliged." As he signed the register, Willow could feel his occasional glances. She kept her head down, unwilling to invite more scrutiny or judgment from this newcomer. After Mrs. Peterson showed him upstairs, the other boarders resumed their hushed conversations, but Willow could hear her name being mentioned. Unable to endure it any longer, she excused herself and retreated to her room. Through her window, she could see the charred remains of the mercantile store, silhouetted against the setting sun. Tears filled her eyes as she wondered how her life had unraveled so completely in such a short time. A soft knock at her door startled her. Wiping her eyes, she called out, "Yes, Miss Taylor." It was Mrs. Peterson. "There's someone here to see you." Willow opened the door to find Mrs. Peterson looking uncomfortable, with Zane Quincy standing a respectful distance behind her in the hallway. "Mr. Quincy has asked to speak with you," Mrs. Peterson explained. "I told him it might not be appropriate given your situation, but he insisted." "It's important," Zane said simply, curiosity overcoming caution. Willow nodded. "We can talk in the parlor." Mrs. Peterson looked relieved. "I'll be in the kitchen if you need anything." In the modest parlor, Willow sat stiffly in a high-backed chair while Zane remained standing, his hat in his hands. "What can I do for you, Mr. Quincy? I don't believe we've met." "We haven't." He studied her with those intense blue eyes. "But I know something about fires, Miss Taylor, and I don't think you started the one that burned down your store." Willow's heart skipped. "What makes you say that?" "Because I've been tracking a man who's been starting fires all across Northern California. I believe he's responsible for yours as well." Willow leaned forward. "Who are you exactly, Mr. Quincy?" "I work for the Western Detective Agency out of San Francisco. Been trailing a firebug named Chester Rollins for nearly 6 months. He's hit 5 businesses from Sacramento to Redding." "And you think he's here in Red Bluff? Why would he target my store?" Zane's expression darkened. "Rollins doesn't need much reason. Sometimes it's for money, sometimes it's just because he enjoys watching things burn." He paused. "But there's usually a pattern. He targets businesses owned by people who are new to town or vulnerable in some way. People who won't have many defenders when accusations start flying." Willow's throat tightened. "Like a woman alone." "Exactly." Zane finally took a seat across from her. "I arrived in town this morning and heard about your situation. The timing and method match Rollins' other fires. I'd like to help clear your name if you'll let me." Hope flickered in Willow's chest for the first time in days, but caution quickly doused it. "Why should I trust you? For all I know, you could be working with the sheriff to trick me into saying something incriminating." A ghost of a smile touched Zane's lips. "Smart question. Here's my credentials." He handed her a leather wallet containing official-looking papers from the Western Detective Agency. "You can wire them in San Francisco to confirm if you'd like." Willow examined the documents. They appeared genuine, but she'd been too trusting already. "I'll consider your offer, Mr. Quincy, but I need time to think." "Fair enough." He rose to leave. "But time isn't something you have much of, Miss Taylor. The town's already decided you're guilty, and frontier justice can move mighty quick when people's minds are made up." "I'm aware," Willow said softly. "I'll give you my answer tomorrow." After he left, Willow sat alone in the parlor, her mind racing. Could she trust this stranger? Did she have any choice? The next morning, Willow awoke to the sounds of heated voices downstairs. She dressed quickly and made her way to the landing, where she could hear Sheriff Holden arguing with someone Zane Quincy. "I don't care what agency you say you're from," the sheriff was saying. "This is my jurisdiction, and I'll handle the investigation my way." "With all due respect, Sheriff," Zane replied, his tone measured but firm, "if Rollins is responsible for this fire, he's already long gone, but I can help you find him before he strikes again. And I'm telling you, we already have our suspect. The evidence, what evidence exactly?" Zane challenged. "That she needed money. Half the people in any town could be arrested on those grounds." Willow descended the stairs, drawing both men's attention. "Sheriff Holden, I'd like Mr. Quincy to investigate the fire." The sheriff's face reddened. "This isn't your decision, Miss Taylor." "Actually," Zane interjected, "since Miss Taylor is the victim of the crime, assuming she didn't commit it herself, she has every right to hire private assistance." He produced a telegram from his pocket. "I've also taken the liberty of contacting the territorial governor's office. They're familiar with the string of arsons I've been investigating and have authorized my involvement." Sheriff Holden snatched the telegram, reading it with a deepening scowl. "Fine, poke around all you want. But Miss Taylor remains under house arrest, and if you interfere with official business, I'll have you in a cell faster than you can blink." After the sheriff stormed out, Willow turned to Zane. "Thank you, Mr. Quincy, but I can't afford to hire you." "I'm not asking for payment," he replied. "The agency is already paying me to catch Rollins. Clearing your name is just part of that job." Willow studied him skeptically. "Most men don't go out of their way to help a woman they've just met without wanting something in return." Zane's expression hardened slightly. My sister was wrongfully accused of theft 5 years ago. No one believed her, and she spent 6 months in prison before the real culprit was caught. By then, her reputation was destroyed. He met Willow's gaze directly. So I have my reasons, Miss Taylor. Something in his earnest explanation resonated with Willow. Very well. How can I help? Tell me everything about the day of the fire and anyone who might have visited your store in the days before. They moved to the parlor, where Willow recounted the events leading up to the fire. She had closed the store at 6 o'clock, having served only a handful of customers that day. Nothing had seemed amiss when she locked up. Were there any strangers in town that you noticed? Zane asked. Anyone who seemed particularly interested in your store or your situation? Willow thought carefully. There was a man I didn't recognize who came in twice that week, said he was passing through. He asked a lot of questions about how long I'd owned the store, whether I had family in town. Can you describe him? Medium height, thin build. He had a scar along his jaw and his eyes were unsettling, cold somehow. Zane nodded grimly. Sounds like Rollins. Did he buy anything? Just some tobacco and matches the first time, nothing the second. Matches, Zane murmured. He's not usually so obvious, but perhaps he's getting careless. He stood. I need to examine what's left of your store. Will you come with me? You might notice if anything's out of place. Willow hesitated. The sheriff said I'm to stay here. You'll be with me, and I have the governor's authority. Besides, we need to move quickly before Rollins' trail goes completely cold. Against her better judgment, Willow agreed. As they walked down Main Street toward the burned-out shell of the mercantile, she was acutely aware of the stares and whispers that followed them. The store was a blackened skeleton, the walls still standing but the roof collapsed inward. The acrid smell of charred wood and melted goods lingered in the air. Sheriff Holden had strung rope around the perimeter, with a crudely painted sign reading, "Keep out by order of the law." Zane ducked under the rope, then offered his hand to help Willow do the same. Watch your step. The floorboards that are left won't be stable. Inside, the devastation was complete. Shelves had collapsed, merchandise reduced to ashes and twisted metal. Willow's throat tightened as she surveyed what remained of her inheritance and her hopes. Zane moved methodically through the ruins, examining burn patterns and sifting carefully through debris. Fire started here, he said, indicating the back storeroom. Just as the marshal reported, but Rollins usually leaves a signature. He knelt down, brushing away ash from a corner of the storeroom. There, he said, pointing to a small symbol scratched into a surviving section of floorboard, a crude drawing of a flame. That's Rollins' mark. He leaves it at every fire, usually somewhere that won't burn completely. Willow peered at the marking. Couldn't anyone have made that? It's not common knowledge. The agency has kept it quiet to help identify his work. Zane stood, dusting off his hands. This is evidence, Miss Taylor, real evidence that could clear your name. As they continued examining the site, a sharp voice cut through the air. What in tarnation are you doing in there? Sheriff Holden stood at the edge of the property, hand on his holster. Miss Taylor, I told you to stay at the boarding house. Before either could respond, a commotion erupted further down the street, shouting, followed by the sound of breaking glass. A man was running full tilt toward them, pursued by several townspeople. Thief, someone yelled, catch him. The running man was heading straight for the burned store, apparently seeking a hiding place or escape route. As he drew closer, Willow gasped it was the same thin man with the scar along his jaw who had been in her store before the fire. Zane tensed beside her. Rollins, he muttered, then pushed Willow behind him protectively. The man skidded to a halt when he spotted them in the ruins, his cold eyes widening in surprise. For a moment he seemed frozen in indecision. Then, with a snarl, he drew a pistol from his coat. Behind me. Zane ordered Willow, drawing his own weapon with lightning speed. Sheriff Holden also had his gun out now, creating a standoff with Rollins caught between them. Drop the gun, Rollins, Zane called. There's nowhere to run. The arsonist's eyes darted between Zane and the sheriff, calculating his odds. His gaze landed briefly on Willow, and a cruel smile twisted his lips. Should have finished the job, he said cryptically, before suddenly swinging his pistol toward her. Two shots rang out simultaneously, one from Zane's gun and one from the sheriff's. Rollins jerked backward, his own shot going wild and splintering what remained of a support beam. He crumpled to the ground, his pistol falling from lifeless fingers. In the stunned silence that followed, Zane moved quickly to check that Rollins was dead, then turned to Willow. "Are you all right?" She nodded shakily, unable to find her voice. Sheriff Holden approached cautiously, his gun still drawn. "Someone want to tell me what in God's name is going on here?" "That's Chester Rollins," Zane explained, holstering his weapon. "The arsonist I've been tracking. He's responsible for the fire that destroyed Miss Taylor's store, along with at least 5 others across Northern California." The sheriff looked skeptical. "And you expect me to believe he just happened to show up here today?" "No, I expect you to investigate properly." Zane pointed to the symbol scratched in the floorboard. "That's Rollins' signature. And if you search him, I'd wager you'll find coal oil on his clothes and more matches than any man needs for personal use." By now, a crowd had gathered, watching the confrontation with undisguised interest. Among them, Willow noticed the faces that had been so quick to condemn her now showing uncertainty. The sheriff knelt beside Rollins' body and began searching his pockets. He pulled out several items, including a small bottle that sloshed with liquid and a large quantity of matches. More damning was a notebook that contained a list of businesses with Willow's Mercantile crossed out and another local establishment circled. Sheriff Holden's expression grew grim as he flipped through the notebook. Looks like he was planning to hit the Morrisons' feed store next. He glanced up at Willow, a hint of remorse in his eyes. "Miss Taylor, it appears I owe you an apology," the crowd murmured, the tide of public opinion already shifting. Willow felt light-headed with relief, but also hollow. Her name might be cleared, but her store was still destroyed, her future uncertain. "You're free to go where you please now," the sheriff continued, rising to his feet, "though I'm not sure what you'll do with." He gestured at the ruins. "She'll rebuild," Zane said firmly, surprising Willow. "And I'd like to help if she'll allow it." Before Willow could respond, Mayor Franklin pushed through the crowd. "Miss Taylor, on behalf of the town, I want to express our deepest regrets for the misunderstanding. Perhaps we can discuss some compensation for your troubles." "Convenient timing, Mayor," Zane remarked dryly. "But I'm sure Miss Taylor appreciates the gesture." As the crowd dispersed, and the sheriff arranged for Rollins' body to be taken to the undertaker, Zane guided Willow away from the scene. "You don't have to stay and help me rebuild," she told him once they were alone. "You've already done more than enough by clearing my name." Zane studied her face. "What will you do if I leave?" Willow straightened her shoulders. "The same thing I was going to do before all this happened. Rebuild the store, make a life for myself here. I didn't come all the way from Boston just to give up at the first obstacle." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Even if that obstacle was a burned-down building and a murder accusation." Despite everything, Willow found herself returning his smile. "Even then." "Well," Zane said, "I admire your spirit, Miss Taylor, but the fact is I've been on the trail for months now. With Rollins dead, my assignment is complete." He hesitated. "And I find I'm not in any particular hurry to return to San Francisco." Something fluttered in Willow's chest, a feeling she promptly tried to suppress. "Mr. Quincy, if you're staying out of pity—" "Not pity," he interrupted. "Admiration, and perhaps a bit of selfishness. I'd like to see this through, help you get back on your feet, make sure the town makes proper amends." His blue eyes held hers. "If you'll let me." Willow considered his offer. She had always prided herself on her independence, but the past few days had taught her that sometimes accepting help wasn't a weakness. "I suppose I could use an extra pair of hands," she conceded. "And someone who knows how to handle a gun, apparently." "Then it's settled." He offered his arm to escort her back to the boarding house. "Now, let's see about getting you some breakfast. Being accused of arson and nearly shot all before noon is hungry work." For the first time in days, Willow laughed. And if she held his arm a little tighter than was strictly necessary, well, she'd been through a lot. Over the next few weeks, Red Bluff witnessed a transformation. What had begun as a reluctant partnership between Willow Taylor and Zane Quincy evolved into something more as they worked side by side to rebuild the mercantile store. Mayor Franklin, eager to make amends, arranged for discounted lumber and supplies. Townspeople who had been quick to condemn Willow now volunteered their labor, partly out of guilt, partly out of a desire to show they weren't the kind of people who'd turn their backs on a neighbor in need. Remarkable how a dead arsonist can change people's attitudes, Zane commented dryly one afternoon as they took a break from work. They sat on a stack of lumber, sharing a canteen of water and watching as volunteers raised a new support beam. "People make mistakes," Willow replied, more forgiving now that her name had been cleared. They were afraid. Fire is terrifying in a town built mostly of wood. Zane studied her profile, admiring the strength that allowed her to forgive so readily. In the week since the shooting, he had discovered layers to Willow Taylor that both intrigued and impressed him. Her determination never wavered, even when faced with setbacks. Her kindness extended even to those who had shunned her. And her intelligence, the way she had redesigned the store's layout to be more efficient, the careful bookkeeping that would ensure she didn't fall into the same financial troubles that had plagued her father, spoke of a mind as sharp as it was practical. "You're staring, Mr. Quincy," Willow said without looking at him, though a smile played at the corners of her mouth. "Zane," he corrected, not for the first time. "After all we've been through, I think we're past formalities." She finally turned to face him, her green eyes bright in the afternoon sun. "Very well, Zane." His name sounded different on her lips, softer somehow. A comfortable silence settled between them until Mrs. Peterson appeared, carrying a basket covered with a checkered cloth. "I thought you two might be hungry," the landlady announced, setting the basket down between them. "Working through the lunch hour again, I see." "Much appreciated, Mrs. Peterson," Zane said, lifting the cloth to reveal fried chicken, biscuits, and apple pie. The older woman beamed. "It's the least I can do. Besides, someone has to make sure Miss Taylor eats properly. She's too thin as it is." After Mrs. Peterson left, Willow shook her head with a laugh. "I swear she's trying to fatten me up like a prized pig." "She feels guilty," Zane observed, handing Willow a piece of chicken. "She believed you were guilty like everyone else, and now she's determined to make it up to me with butter and sugar." Willow took a bite, closing her eyes briefly in appreciation, though I can't say I mind her methods. As they ate, Zane found his thoughts drifting to a future he hadn't considered before meeting Willow. His life had been nomadic for years, moving from case to case, town to town, never staying long enough to put down roots. But watching Willow rebuild, seeing her determination to create something lasting, made him wonder if there might be value in staying in one place, in building something of his own. "I received a telegram from the agency yesterday," he said suddenly. Willow looked up, a flicker of something disappointment crossing her face. "Another assignment. They've offered me one, yes, in Oregon, I see." She carefully set down her biscuit, brushing crumbs from her fingers. "When will you be leaving?" "I haven't accepted it yet." He watched her closely. "I told them I needed to finish things here first." Hope brightened her eyes before she could mask it. "The store should be completed within 2 weeks if the weather holds. You wouldn't want to keep your employers waiting much longer than that." "It's not just the store I'm thinking about," Zane admitted. "Willow, he was interrupted by a shout from one of the workers. "Miss Taylor, we need your opinion on these window placements." Willow stood quickly, perhaps too quickly. "Duty calls." She paused, looking down at him. "We can continue this conversation later. Count on it," he promised. That evening, a celebration was held at the town hall to officially clear Willow's name. Mayor Franklin made a public apology and announced that the town council had voted to provide 6 months of free merchandise to stock her new store once it opened. "It's the least we can do after the unfortunate misunderstanding," the mayor declared, raising his glass in a toast. "To Miss Willow Taylor, Red Bluff's newest and most resilient business owner." The assembled townspeople echoed the toast, many coming forward afterward to personally apologize or offer additional help with the rebuilding effort. Willow accepted their contrition with grace, though Zane noted the wariness that still lingered in her eyes. "They're trying," he murmured, standing beside her as yet another town resident expressed their regrets. People don't like to admit they were wrong, but they're making an effort. I know, Willow replied softly, and I am grateful. She hesitated. I can't help wondering how quickly they might turn again, given the right circumstances. That's fair, Zane acknowledged. Trust has to be earned back. It doesn't happen overnight. Their conversation was interrupted by Sheriff Holden, who approached with an unusually humble expression. Miss Taylor, Mr. Quincy, he greeted them. I want to add my personal apology to the official one. I should have been more thorough in my investigation. Yes, you should have, Zane agreed bluntly. Willow shot him a reproving look before addressing the sheriff. Thank you, Sheriff Holden. I appreciate your candor. The sheriff nodded awkwardly. There's something else you should know. We received confirmation from Sacramento about Rollins. He was wanted in 3 states for arson and murder. There was a substantial reward for his capture, dead or alive. He reached into his pocket and withdrew an envelope. This is your share, Mr. Quincy, as the primary agent tracking him. Zane accepted the envelope with a nod of thanks. And this, the sheriff continued, producing a second, thicker envelope, is for you, Miss Taylor. As the victim of his crime and a witness to his demise, you're entitled to a portion as well. Willow's eyes widened as she took the envelope. I thank you, Sheriff. I wasn't expecting this. It won't bring back what you lost, Sheriff Holden said gruffly, but it might help with the rebuilding. After the sheriff moved on, Willow peeked inside the envelope and gasped softly. Zane, there must be several $100s here. The reward for Rollins was substantial, Zane confirmed. He'd done a lot of damage over the years. Willow clutched the envelope, her eyes suddenly bright with unshed tears. With this and the town's help, I can rebuild the store exactly as I envisioned, maybe even better. Seeing her joy, Zane made a decision. Willow, about that conversation we started earlier once again, they were interrupted, this time by Mrs. Peterson announcing that refreshments were being served in the adjoining room. The crowd shifted, carrying them along in separate directions. By the time the celebration wound down, it was late, and whatever moment had been building between them seemed to have passed. They walked back to the boarding house in comfortable silence, the night air cool against their skin. At the foot of the stairs that led to their separate rooms, Willow turned to him. Thank you for coming tonight, for standing beside me. It made facing everyone much easier. You would have managed fine without me, Zane said with a smile, but I'm glad I could help. She studied his face in the dim lamplight. Will you be at the construction site tomorrow? Wouldn't miss it. Those windows won't hang themselves. Willow nodded, seeming to want to say more but unsure how to begin. Finally, she simply said, "Good night, Zane," and started up the stairs. Willow, he called softly, stopping her. When she turned, he said, I declined the assignment in Oregon. Her breath caught audibly. Why? I think you know why. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, the air between them charged with unspoken possibilities. Then, with a small nod and a smile that lit up her eyes, Willow continued up the stairs. Zane watched until she disappeared from view, a sense of certainty settling over him. For the first time in years, he knew exactly where he was supposed to be. The next few days passed in a blur of activity as the rebuilding of the mercantile store progressed rapidly. With the reward money, Willow was able to hire additional workers and purchase higher quality materials than she had originally planned. Zane found himself increasingly involved not just in the physical construction, but in the planning of the business itself. His experience tracking criminals across the West had given him insight into security measures that might protect the store from future incidents, and his natural practicality complemented Willow's vision. If we place the counter here, he suggested one afternoon, sketching on a piece of paper, you'll have clear sight lines to both the front and back doors. Makes it harder for anyone to slip in unnoticed. Willow leaned over his shoulder to study the drawing, close enough that he could smell the lavender scent of her hair. That makes sense, she agreed, but I was planning to put the dry goods shelves there. We could move them to the north wall instead. Better light from those windows for displaying colorful items anyway. She nodded thoughtfully. You have a good eye for this sort of thing. Just practical experience, he demurred. When you've had to track people who don't want to be found, you learn to think about how spaces can be used. Well, whatever the reason, I'm grateful for your input. She straightened up, but not before her hand briefly rested on his shoulder, a touch that lingered in his mind long after she moved away. As they worked side by side day after day, the connection between them deepened. Zane found himself sharing stories of his past that he'd never told anyone, about his sister's wrongful imprisonment, about growing up on a failing farm in Missouri, about his decision to become a detective after witnessing too many injustices go unpunished. In turn, Willow told him about her childhood in Boston, about her mother who had worked as a seamstress to support them after Willow's father abandoned them, about her determination to make something of the mercantile store despite having no experience in retail. I could have sold it, she admitted one evening as they sat on the newly constructed front porch of the store, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. A man from Sacramento offered to buy it sight unseen when he heard about my father's death. Probably would have been the sensible choice. Why didn't you? Zane asked, genuinely curious. Willow was quiet for a moment, her eyes on the distant horizon. Because it was the only thing my father ever gave me, she finally said. And even though he left us, even though he was never the father I needed, I wanted to prove that I could make something of his legacy. That I was worthy of it, even if he didn't think so. Zane's heart ached for the young girl who had been abandoned, for the woman who still carried those wounds. Without thinking, he reached out and took her hand in his. He was a fool to leave you, he said softly, and an even bigger fool never to come back. Her eyes, when they met his, were bright with unshed tears. Thank you, she whispered. They sat in silence after that, hands still joined, watching as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. The next day brought unexpected news. A telegram arrived for Zane from his agency in San Francisco. Urgent, stop another fire, Sacramento, stop matches Rollins pattern, stop return, immediately stop. Zane read the message twice, a frown deepening on his face. Willow, seeing his expression, set down the inventory list she had been working on. Bad news. He handed her the telegram without comment, watching as she read it, her own face growing troubled. But Rollins is dead, she said, looking up at him. We both saw it happen. Yes, we did. Zane paced the length of the partially completed store. Which means either he had an accomplice we didn't know about, or someone is copying his methods, Willow finished, understanding the implications immediately. Either way, you need to go. Zane stopped pacing, turning to face her. I don't want to leave you. The simple admission hung in the air between them, charged with meaning neither had fully voiced yet. I know, Willow said softly. But this is your job, Zane. And if someone else is out there setting fires, using the same methods that nearly destroyed my life, you need to stop them. He knew she was right, but the thought of leaving just when things between them were beginning to take shape felt like a physical pain. The store isn't finished yet. It's close enough. The structure is sound, the roof is on, the windows are in, the rest is just details. She tried to smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. I can manage. I'll come back, Zane promised, crossing the room to stand before her. As soon as this is resolved, I'll come back to you. Willow's breath caught at the intensity in his voice, at the promise in his eyes. I'll hold you to that, Zane Quincy. Unable to resist any longer, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her gently at first, then with growing passion as she responded, her hands gripping the front of his shirt to pull him closer. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. I've been wanting to do that for weeks, he admitted, resting his forehead against hers. What took you so long? She teased, though her voice was unsteady. I wasn't sure if you felt the same way. For a detective, you can be remarkably unobservant sometimes, Willow said with a small laugh. Zane smiled, but it faded quickly as reality reasserted itself. I need to leave on tomorrow's stage if I'm going to reach Sacramento in time to be of any use. Then we have tonight, Willow said simply. That evening, after a quiet dinner at the boarding house, they walked through the town, talking of everything and nothing. Zane told her more about the case, about what he might find in Sacramento, about how long he might be gone. A week, maybe 2 at most, he estimated. Enough time to determine if this new fire is truly connected to Rollins, and if so, to help the local authorities track down whoever is responsible. And then, Willow asked, the question holding more weight than its simplicity suggested. Zane stopped walking, turning to face her under the light of a street lamp. And then I come back here, to you. He took her hands in his. Willow, I know we've only known each other a short time, but I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. I feel the same way, she admitted, her eyes luminous in the lamplight. When I return, Zane continued, I'd like to court you properly, if you'll have me. Willow's smile was radiant. I would like that very much. Their kiss this time was a promise of a future together, of possibilities neither had dared hope for before meeting the other. The next morning dawned clear and bright, in stark contrast to the heaviness in Zane's heart as he prepared to leave. He had already packed his few belongings and settled his account at the boarding house by the time Willow came downstairs. She walked with him to the stagecoach stop, both of them quiet, hands occasionally brushing against each other as they walked. I'll write, Zane promised as they waited for the stage to arrive, and telegraph when I can. I'll be here, Willow assured him. The store should be ready to open by the time you return. You'll hardly recognize it. It's not the store I'll be coming back for, he said softly, drawing a smile from her despite the sadness of the moment. When the stage arrived, their goodbye was brief but heartfelt, a lingering kiss, whispered promises, and then he was gone, the coach disappearing in a cloud of dust as it headed south toward Sacramento. Willow watched until it was out of sight, then squared her shoulders and turned back toward town. She had a store to finish, a business to prepare, and a future to look forward to. The days without Zane passed more slowly than Willow had anticipated. She threw herself into work, overseeing the final stages of construction, ordering inventory, and preparing for the grand opening of Taylor's Mercantile, which she had scheduled for exactly 2 weeks after Zane's departure, the outside limit of when he had estimated he would return. True to his word, Zane wrote regularly. His letters arrived every few days, detailing his investigation in Sacramento. The fire there had indeed matched Rollins' pattern, right down to the flame symbol carved into the floorboards. But there were subtle differences too. The accelerant used was kerosene rather than coal oil, and the timing of the fire suggested the arsonist was less experienced than Rollins had been. I believe we're dealing with a copycat, Zane wrote in his third letter. Someone who knew of Rollins' methods but lacks his finesse. The local sheriff has identified a potential suspect, a young man who worked briefly with Rollins in a lumber camp last year. We're closing in on him now. Willow read and reread each letter, taking comfort in the connection they maintained even across the distance. In her replies, she told him about the progress on the store, about the changing attitudes of the townspeople, and increasingly about her feelings for him. I find myself watching for you in every face that passes, she wrote one evening. The store is nearly complete now, but it feels as though something essential is missing. I realize that something is you, Zane. Your presence has become as necessary to me as breath itself. As the day of the grand opening approached, anticipation in Red Bluff grew. The new Taylor's Mercantile was larger and more impressive than the original store had been, with large display windows, a wide covered porch, and interior improvements that made it the most modern establishment in town. Mayor Franklin had declared the opening a town event, with festivities planned throughout the day. It was, Willow knew, partly a continued effort to make amends for the town's treatment of her after the fire, but she accepted the gesture in the spirit it was offered. The morning of the opening dawned clear and warm. Willow rose early, dressing in a new gown of deep blue that she had splurged on specifically for the occasion. As she arranged her hair, she found herself hoping that Zane would arrive in time to see her in it. His last letter, received 2 days earlier, had been optimistic but non-committal about his return date. The suspect had been apprehended, but there were legal matters to attend to, statements to be given. I will do everything in my power to be there for your opening, he had written. But if I am delayed, know that my heart is with you regardless of where my body must be. By mid-morning, the town was bustling with activity. A banner stretched across Main Street proclaiming Grand Opening Taylor's Mercantile in bold letters. Tables had been set up in the street for a community picnic, and a small band was playing cheerful tunes near the town square. At exactly 10 o'clock, Willow unlocked the doors of her store for the first time. A cheer went up from the gathered crowd as she tied back the doors and invited everyone inside. For the next several hours, she was too busy to think about anything beyond the immediate demands of business, showing merchandise, making sales, accepting congratulations from what seemed like every resident of Red Bluff. It was mid-afternoon before she had a moment to herself, stepping onto the back porch of the store for a breath of fresh air. The celebration was still in full swing out front, but here, in the quiet shade, she could finally exhale. Quite a success, it seems. The familiar voice made her heart skip. She turned to find Zane leaning against the doorframe, dusty from travel but smiling broadly. "Zane," she exclaimed, crossing the distance between them in a few quick steps. "You made it." He caught her in his arms, lifting her slightly off the ground as they embraced. "Did you doubt I would?" "Never," she said truthfully, looking up into his face. "But I was beginning to worry you might be delayed." "Nothing could have kept me away," he assured her, setting her gently back on her feet but keeping his arms around her waist. "I took the early stage from Sacramento, arrived just in time to see you opening the doors. You were so busy, I didn't want to interrupt." "You could have," she said, resting her hands on his chest. "I would have welcomed the interruption." His smile softened as he studied her face. "You look beautiful, Willow, and the store, it's magnificent. You've accomplished so much in such a short time." "We accomplished it," she corrected him. "I couldn't have done it without your help. Your ideas are incorporated into every corner of this place." "I'm glad I could contribute," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "And I hope I can continue to do so." Before she could ask what he meant, a voice called from inside the store. "Miss Taylor, are you back here? Mayor Franklin is looking for you." Zane released her with a rueful smile. "Duty calls. Again." "The story of our relationship so far," Willow said with a small laugh. "But later," he agreed, the promise in his voice sending a shiver down her spine. The remainder of the day passed in a blur of activity. Zane stayed close by, helping with customers when needed, but mostly watching Willow in her element with undisguised pride. When Mayor Franklin made a speech praising her resilience and entrepreneurial spirit, Zane's applause was the loudest of all. As evening approached and the celebration began to wind down, Willow found herself increasingly aware of Zane's gaze following her. There was something different in his expression, a decision made, a certainty that hadn't been there before his trip to Sacramento. Finally, as the last customers left and she prepared to lock up for the night, they were alone in the store. The silence between them was charged with anticipation. "So," Willow said, turning the key in the lock, "you never did tell me how the case was resolved." "It was as I suspected," Zane replied, moving closer to her. "A copycat who had worked with Rollins briefly. He confessed everything once we caught up to him, and your agency." "Are they sending you on another assignment now?" Zane shook his head. "Actually, I've resigned from the Western Detective Agency." Willow's eyes widened in surprise. "You've what?" "But your career, my career was tracking down criminals across the West," he interrupted gently. "Living out of saddlebags, never staying in one place long enough to call it home." His gaze held her steadily. "I'm ready for something different now, something permanent." Her heart raced as she understood what he was saying. "And what might that be?" Instead of answering directly, Zane reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. "While I was in Sacramento, I had time to think about what I really want from life, and I realized that what I want most is a future with you, Willow Taylor." He opened the box to reveal a simple but elegant ring, a small diamond set in gold, flanked by tiny sapphires. "I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other a short time, but when you've spent years wandering, you learn to recognize home when you find it." He took her hand in his. "You're my home, Willow, and if you'll have me, I want to be yours." Tears blurred Willow's vision as emotion overwhelmed her. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" "I am." Zane knelt before her, still holding her hand. "Willow Taylor, will you marry me?" "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Zane Quincy, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and pulled her into his arms, his kiss a seal on their promise. Later, as they sat together on the front porch of the store, her store, soon to be their store, watching the stars emerge in the evening sky, Willow marveled at how her life had changed in just a few short months. If someone had told me when I first arrived in Red Bluff that I would lose everything, be accused of arson, and end up engaged to the man who cleared my name, I would have thought they were mad, she said, leaning her head against Zane's shoulder. He chuckled, his arm tightening around her. Life has a way of surprising you. When I rode into town tracking Rollins, the last thing I expected was to find the woman I want to spend the rest of my life with. Do you think we're rushing? Willow asked, voicing the one doubt that lingered in her mind. It hasn't even been 3 months since we met. Some people court for years and never truly know each other, Zane replied thoughtfully. We've faced danger together, rebuilt from ashes together. I'd say we've had a fair test of compatibility. Willow smiled, reassured by his words and by the certainty she felt in her own heart. When should we tell people? Whenever you're ready. Though I suspect Mrs. Peterson will notice that ring the moment we walk into the boarding house. And then the whole town will know by breakfast, Willow laughed. Nothing travels faster than gossip in Red Bluff. Let them talk, Zane said, turning to face her. As long as we know what we want, that's all that matters. What they wanted, they both agreed, was a small wedding before the end of summer. Neither had much family. Zane's parents were long deceased, and his sister lived far away in St. Louis with her husband and children. Willow's mother had passed 2 years earlier, and she had no other relatives she was close to. Just a few friends then, Willow decided. Mrs. Peterson, of course, Mayor Franklin, since he's been so supportive during the rebuilding, perhaps Sheriff Holden to show there are no hard feelings. And Reverend Davis to perform the ceremony, Zane added. Unless you'd prefer to be married by a judge. No, the church would be lovely, Willow said, imagining the small white building with its stained glass windows that caught the morning light. Simple, but meaningful. They set the date for August 12th, just 6 weeks away. It was enough time to prepare without prolonging the engagement unnecessarily, they reasoned. Word of their engagement spread quickly through Red Bluff, just as they had predicted. Mrs. Peterson was the first to notice the ring, exclaiming over it at breakfast the morning after Zane's proposal. By noon, it seemed every resident of the town had stopped by the mercantile to offer congratulations. I knew it, Mrs. Peterson declared triumphantly as she helped Willow arrange a new display of fabrics. From the moment he stood up for you during that terrible business with the fire, I said to myself, that man is smitten, Willow laughed. Is that so? You might have mentioned it to me. It would have saved us both some uncertainty. Pshaw, the older woman dismissed. Some things people need to figure out for themselves. Besides, watching you two dance around each other was the most entertainment this town has seen in years. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. The store was thriving, with customers coming not just from Red Bluff, but from surrounding communities as well, drawn by word of the modern, well-stocked establishment. Zane proved to be a natural at business, his attention to detail and security complementing Willow's eye for merchandise and customer relations. They decided to build a home of their own on a piece of land at the edge of town close enough to the store for convenience, but with enough space around it to feel private. Construction would begin after the wedding, but in the meantime, they pored over plans in their free moments, designing a house that would be both practical and comfortable. 2 stories, Willow insisted, with a proper parlor for entertaining. And a study, Zane added, for keeping the store's books and any private detective work I might take on locally. They both wanted children, Zane coming from a large family, and Willow having always dreamed of the family she herself had never had. The house plans included 3 bedrooms upstairs. For a start, as Zane put it with a wink that made Willow blush despite herself. As the wedding day approached, Willow found herself increasingly reflective. One evening, as she and Zane walked along the river that gave Red Bluff its name, she voiced the thought that had been circling in her mind. It's strange, isn't it? If my father hadn't abandoned us, if he hadn't come here and built that store, if it hadn't burned down and I hadn't been accused. She looked up at Zane. So many things had to go wrong for us to find each other. He considered this, his expression thoughtful. Or maybe they didn't go wrong at all. Maybe they went exactly as they were supposed to. You believe in fate? Willow asked, surprised. Zane had always struck her as too practical for such notions. I believe that life rarely follows the path we expect, he replied. And that sometimes, what looks like disaster can lead to something wonderful if we're brave enough to keep going. He squeezed her hand. You were brave, Willow. When everything was taken from you, when the whole town turned against you, you didn't give up. That's one of the many reasons I love you. His words warmed her from the inside out. I love you too, Zane Quincy, more than I ever thought possible. August 12th dawned clear and perfect, with just enough of a breeze to take the edge off the summer heat. Willow dressed in her room at the boarding house, assisted by Mrs. Peterson and two other ladies from town who had become friends during the rebuilding of the store. Her wedding dress was simple but elegant ivory satin with delicate lace trim, ordered from Sacramento and altered to fit her slender frame perfectly. Her hair was arranged in soft curls, adorned with small white flowers rather than a veil. You look beautiful, dear Mrs. Peterson said, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Absolutely radiant. Thank you, Willow replied, smoothing the skirt of her dress nervously. And thank you for everything you've done to help with the wedding preparations. Nonsense, the landlady said briskly, though her eyes remained misty. It's been my pleasure, though I must say the boarding house will be a lot quieter without you two around. Willow and Zane had arranged to stay at the hotel for their wedding night and the few days following, until they could move into temporary quarters above the store while their house was being built. It was a practical arrangement, but also symbolic of a fresh start together. At precisely 11 o'clock, Willow arrived at the church, where Zane was waiting for her. The small building was filled with well-wishers, not just the few friends they had initially planned to invite, but it seemed half the town of Red Bluff had turned out to see them wed. Reverend Davis performed a simple but heartfelt ceremony. When Zane recited his vows, his voice was steady and sure, his eyes never leaving Willow's. When it was her turn, she spoke clearly despite the emotion that threatened to overwhelm her, promising to love and honor him for all the days of her life. By the power vested in me, Reverend Davis concluded, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. Zane's kiss was gentle, but full of promise, a beginning rather than an ending. As they turned to face their friends as Mr. and Mrs. Quincy for the first time, Willow felt a sense of rightness, of belonging, that she had never experienced before. The celebration that followed was joyous and lively. The town had arranged a feast in the square, with tables laden with food and drink, and the small band playing tunes for dancing. As the afternoon wore on into evening, Willow and Zane moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes from people who, just months earlier, had viewed Willow with suspicion and hostility. Quite a turnaround, Zane commented quietly as they shared a moment alone. From pariah to beloved citizen in less than half a year. People can change, Willow replied, watching as Mayor Franklin led his wife in an enthusiastic if somewhat clumsy dance. And so can circumstances. I've learned not to hold grudges. Life is too short and happiness too precious. Zane's arm tightened around her waist. Speaking of happiness, Mrs. Quincy, what do you say we make our excuses and begin ours? The look in his eyes sent heat coursing through Willow's veins. I would say that's the best suggestion I've heard all day, Mr. Quincy. They slipped away as the celebration continued, walking hand in hand through the twilight toward the hotel. Their room was the best the establishment had to offer, not luxurious by big city standards, but comfortable and private, with a large bed and windows that looked out over the river. As Zane closed the door behind them, Willow felt a moment of shyness despite the weeks of anticipation that had led to this moment. Nervous? Zane asked softly, coming to stand before her. A little, she admitted. I've never. That is, I know, he said, taking her hands in his. We'll go as slowly as you need to. His gentleness, his patience, his clear desire for her to be comfortable above all else, these things melted Willow's nervousness away. She leaned up to kiss him, putting all her love, all her trust into the gesture. What followed was a night of discovery, of tenderness giving way to passion, of two people becoming truly one for the first time. And afterward, as they lay tangled together in the moonlight that streamed through the open window, Willow knew with absolute certainty that all the trials she had faced had led her exactly where she was meant to be, in the arms of the man who had fought for her, believed in her, and loved her when no one else would. Epilogue: 5 years later, the autumn sun cast long shadows across the porch of the Quincy home as Willow rocked gently, her youngest child, 10-month-old Samuel, sleeping peacefully in her arms. From the yard came the sound of laughter as Zane chased their 3-year-old daughter, Elizabeth, in a game of tag around the oak tree they had planted when they first built the house. "Papa, you're too slow," Elizabeth giggled, her dark curls so like her father's bouncing as she ran. "I'm letting you win," Zane called back, deliberately stumbling to make her laugh harder. Willow smiled as she watched them, her heart full to bursting with the love she felt for her family. The past 5 years had brought more joy than she had ever imagined possible. The mercantile store had flourished under their joint management, expanding to include a second location in the next town over. Zane had indeed taken on occasional detective work for the county sheriff's office, but only cases that kept him close to home. His reputation for fairness and thoroughness had made him respected throughout the region. Their home, initially planned as a modest 2-story dwelling, had grown along with their family and prosperity. The addition of a sunroom last year had been Zane's anniversary gift to Willow, a place where she could grow flowers year-round and escape the bustle of daily life when needed. Red Bluff itself had changed too, growing from a small frontier town into a more established community. The arrival of the railroad 2 years earlier had brought new opportunities and faces. Through it all, the Quincy's had remained at the heart of town life, their story of overcoming adversity to find love becoming something of a local legend. Zane, having thoroughly lost the game of tag, scooped Elizabeth up and carried her, shrieking with delight, to the porch. "I believe this young lady is ready for her lunch," he announced, setting her down beside Willow's rocker. "And what about you?" Willow asked, looking up at her husband with the same love that had only deepened over the years. "Starving," he admitted with a grin. But first, he leaned down to kiss her, then pressed another gentle kiss to Samuel's forehead. "How's the little man? Finally sleeping?" "He's been fussy all morning. Here, let me take him. You go rest before lunch." Zane carefully lifted the baby from her arms. "You were up half the night with him." "So were you," Willow pointed out, but she rose anyway, stretching muscles that had grown stiff from rocking. "Yes, but I didn't have to feed him," Zane countered. "Go on, Elizabeth and I can handle things for a while. Can't we, princess?" The little girl nodded solemnly. "I'm Papa's helper." "That you are," Willow agreed, dropping a kiss on her daughter's head before heading inside. Their bedroom was cool and quiet, the curtains drawn against the midday sun. Willow sat at her dressing table, unpinning her hair and brushing it out with slow, meditative strokes. As she did so, her gaze fell on a small wooden box on the dresser, a keepsake box Zane had made for her on their first anniversary. Opening it, she withdrew a folded piece of paper, the telegram that had summoned Zane to Sacramento 5 years earlier. The message that had briefly separated them, only to confirm how deeply they belonged together. She had kept it as a reminder of how quickly life could change, and how love could transform even the darkest circumstances. Next to it lay another memento, a charred piece of wood from the original mercantile store. Zane had salvaged it during the rebuilding, later mounting it in a small frame with the inscription, "From these ashes, our life together rose." Willow smiled as she returned the items to the box. From the kitchen below came the sounds of Zane and Elizabeth preparing lunch, his deep voice explaining something patiently, her high-pitched questions and giggles in response. Samuel would be awake again soon, hungry and demanding his own share of attention. Her life was full, her heart complete in a way she had never imagined possible when she first arrived in Red Bluff as a lonely, uncertain young woman facing an unknown future. The fire that had nearly destroyed her had instead led her to the greatest happiness she had ever known. Outside, the afternoon sun continued its slow arc across the sky, casting its warm light over the home and family of Willow and Zane Quincy, a light that had replaced the destructive flames of the past with the steady, enduring glow of love.